A few decades back, the United States government had an ongoing overseas military base installed in the Philippines. It was hailed as one of the most important foreign treaties in the country, as it not only provided support and protection for the archipelago nation, but also contributed massively to the economy. This treaty of protection had also shown the importance of the Philippines-United States relationship. However, after decades of operating in the country's most strategic bases, such as the Subic Bay and Clark Air Base, they were eventually closed down. The Philippine government themselves had even issued a formal notice to the United States and its military that they are required to leave by the end of 1992. These were immediate impacts on the economy and a huge distraught to society. Economists have cited that the U.S. military bases contributed as much as 5% to the gross domestic product of the Philippines, both directly and indirectly. However, the loss of the U.S. military bases has also waved a loss of security, which has drawn upon Filipinos. Therefore, losing both security and economic benefits was undoubtedly unfortunate. Fast forward decades later, the United States and the Philippines government had once again announced in late 2022 that they would reopen a base in Subic Bay, after the governments amended the treaty, which is known as the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, an initiative aimed to bolster the two nations' alliance, which, after decades, allowed the U.S. military to come back to the shores of the archipelago country, many of which were in various other bases, but the most important one was specifically back in the Subic Bay. The story of the United States military bases and their economic benefits was definitely something to look out for, since it plays a huge role in the Philippines. However, as important as them being in the country, it too is important to understand why they left in the first place. So, why did they leave? And will this new agreement enable them to stay for a longer period? Before we answer these, we must first go back to the beginning of when the United States occupied its most important overseas military base, Subic Bay. The Subic Bay dates its way back to the Spanish period. The Spanish colonials deemed the bay to be very strategic since it was used as a base, which happened exactly in 1884, when a royal decree handed by the royalty of Spain was declared upon Subic Bay, which stated that the bay would be used as a naval port. The importance of how Spain realized this strategic location showcases just how important Subic Bay is even before the modern era. But it was not until the United States came and made the Subic Bay naval base more important, an initiative that would truly ensure that the location would shine. Around early 1900, the United States Navy made a thorough study of building a Navy base program, which eventually landed them in Subic Bay. Then President Theodore Roosevelt even issued an executive order to establish the Subic Bay Naval Reservation, a project that would cost $1 million, which adjusted for inflation would be a whopping $27 million. This enabled Subic Bay to be modernized and have its importance grow. By the coming decades, the Philippines would undergo siege, led by a vast number of overseas wars. During the Japanese invasion, for instance, Subic Bay had become so important to the point that it became a center for distraught. When the Japanese military came, they occupied the Subic Bay base of the U.S. military for a limited amount of time, and throughout their invasion of the country, combat after combat reigned over the waters and lands of Subic. By the end of the Second World War, Subic Bay would then be given back to the U.S. military. Its strategic standpoint was likewise so important to the point that they continued to use it and even designated it as the Naval Advanced United No. 6. Further expansions and upgrades were implemented. One of them is an aerial facility known as the Naval Air Station Cubi Point, which today is known as the Subic Bay International Airport, an aviation hub that serves as the secondary and diversion airport for the country's main airport hub is known as the Ninoy Aquino International Hub. The importance of the Subic Bay Naval Base was not even limited to an action for defending the Philippines. After the Second World War, subsequent wars came, and the naval base shipyard had enabled hundreds upon hundreds of ships every single year to be repaired and replenished there. By the 1960s, it was reported that the U.S. naval base Subic Bay was employing roughly 4,300 American military and citizens and more than 15,000 Filipino workers, which is almost 20,000 people in a decade which is arguably important for the Philippines and its economy. Fast forward to the late 1980s. The U.S. military bases in the Philippines were nearing expiration. It was, after all, not an indefinite official agreement. The two governments signed the military bases agreement back in 1947, but it was now due to expire, and negotiations to extend the program began. At first, the Philippine government wanted the United States to pay more for operating in the Philippines, whereas the United States did not want to sign what the Philippine government asked for since they were asking for too much. So instead, they offered a smaller payment. But payments were not the only issue. By 1991, many questions were raised in the U.S. that they could not answer. They refused to detail their withdrawal plans or to even answer if nuclear weapons were kept on the base. Therefore, the president of the Philippines then issued a formal notice that the U.S. must leave by the end of 1992. During its peak, the naval station Subic Bay was once claimed to be the U.S.'s largest overseas facility after the Clark Air Base, which meant that it was an important and strategic military interest for the United States. However, this formal notice would crumble their overseas installation. As soon as the U.S. left, the Subic Bay area where they operated was soon declared a Freeport zone by the Philippine government. The strategic standpoint of the Subic Bay base and the equipment and facilities left enabled the area to thrive. The Subic Special Economic and Freeport Zone, as it is formally now called, is renowned as one of the largest economic drivers for the Philippines. By the time the U.S. government left, the country immediately saw many other private U.S.-based companies establish their presence there. Companies such as Coastal Petroleum and FedEx had pumped over $3 billion, whereas the South Korean company known as Hanjin Heavy Industries carved out their names by creating one of the largest foreign investments ever made, a shipyard of their own known as the Hanjin Subic Shipyard. Many more subsequent investments came, and the largest estimates as of the time of this writing cited that the Freeport employed over 150,000 employees. This can easily suggest just how massive this Freeport is to the country's economy. Even after the Hanjin shipyard had declared bankruptcy in 2019, which caused fear among the locals and a huge blow to the Philippine economy, it was unbothered. An immediate buyer came up, which was known as the Cerberus Capital Management, an American-based firm. This ultimately suggested that, as soon as a company falls, a buyer immediately picks up their facility due to the strategic importance of the shipyard and might as well be the location. Today, however, as we mentioned earlier, the United States military has once again started to come back to the Philippines, strategically back in Subic Bay. Now, there are many reasons why this happened. First of all, the growing tensions between the Philippines and China have become a national threat. Therefore, the signed Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement back in 2014 first enabled the United States to have 5 locations back again in the Philippines, not including Subic Bay. But this initiated the United States, after leaving in 1992, to slowly come back. By late 2022, it was announced that the United States will be implementing more bases, and this time they will occupy Subic Bay once again. The agreement so far, as stated by official media, has said that a portion of the former Hanjin shipyard will be given to them for military use, but the other portions will be held by the private firm known as Cerberus Capital Management. This new Subic Bay agreement was even just part of the 5 additional signed agreement bases, which can suggest that the U.S. military is once again becoming a large part of the Philippines. But even though the impacts on the economy will be massive, the agreement has also indicated that they are not allowed to establish a permanent military base. Regardless, the impacts of all these are likewise going to be massive. Back then, it was cited that they were contributing around 5% to the Philippine GDP. Right now, at a crucial time, who knows just how big their economic impacts will be again. It could be argued that it'll be lower, but can also be argued that it'll be higher. Nevertheless, the return of the United States in Subic Bay and all across the Philippines is suggesting one important factor. The Philippines and the United States alliance has now become more important than ever. But anyway, how big do you think these military bases, not just in Subic Bay but all across the Philippines, will be for the country? Let us know down below. Thanks for watching.